So I'm Ginger Zumaeta. I am the CEO and founder and principal strategist here at Motive3, where we specialize in messaging strategy. And I'm also joined by Stacy Heim, who is another principal strategist and CMO for Motive3. But is there anything that you would add to that, Stacy?
Not really, other than the fact I'm just really happy to be here to be talking about what we're about to talk about, messaging.
Awesome. Awesome. Yes. Okay. So today, let's talk messaging playbooks. I'm curious, when you think of messaging playbooks, what are you thinking? What does that mean to you?
Well, I would break down the two words. The first thing I think about is messaging. And messaging has become a very important aspect for any company in its branding efforts. I discovered this very early on in my career, but it came really into focus about, maybe 6 years ago at my last big corporate role. And working for a very, very big company nationwide and struggling with how to tell its message in a consistent way so that it would be heard by its intended audiences. So the word messaging itself, I'd love to dive into deeper with you about what that means. And then the word playbook, what does that mean? So playbook, and how do we actually put messaging into play? How do we use it internally and externally? So there's a job of coming up with the messaging, and there's a job coming up with the playbook, and together the messaging playbook, and then how do you use it? How do you go to market and so forth? So very, very critical work to be done for every organization.
Yeah, you raise a good point, which is the word messaging. It's not like a normal word that comes out of people's mouths on a day-to-day basis. And so, we work a lot on messaging, here at Motive3. And we get a lot of questions like, oh, does that mean you do social or are you PR, et cetera, et cetera. And so why don't you, share a little bit about what messaging really is when we talk about it? And I'll chime in if there's anything else that I have to add.
Sure, that would be great. I'm going to share one of my favorite quotes, not my quote, was what actually it wasn't even my former CMO. It was an executive vice president who said this in my last role, which was, you can't wear all of your clothes in your closet at once. And what that means is you can't, as it relates to messaging, means you can't say everything you want to possibly say about your company at once. You say too much, nobody hears anything. So messaging is really about an exercise in prioritizing what to say and how to say it. So really it's like, what's the best of? What are the best things that put your best foot forward, that truly differentiate you, that make you unique in the marketplace, that is authentic to your brand and what you deliver, and is relatable to your audiences as well. And so it's really an exercise in prioritizing what to say, right? Those things that kind of rise to the top. And it's a hard exercise to do for a lot of companies because people want to say so many things. And you can't. You really have to pick the things that matter the most to you and to your audience and be consistent in how you use it, when you use it, and where you use it.
Yeah, so let's start to parse this out a little bit, because when I think of messaging, I'm thinking, at its very core, like the ultimate kind of like core messaging is really, some sort of pithy expression of the value of the brand or the product or the service or whatever it is in the marketplace that is expressed in a way that the people who need to understand it. But then off of that, you need to build all of these other things, right? You're going to express yourself differently than you would in a corporate comms piece or in PR. than you would if you're doing a social campaign, than you would if you're creating sales enablement materials, et cetera, et cetera. And so, I think the hard thing for folks to understand is like, sure, there's all of these other things, but what is that thread that kind of holds it all together? And I'll throw on another thing just to even complicate it a little bit more, is when we had a project recently, for example, where we did a big messaging project for a cybersecurity company. We were really trying to get to the essence of what they did and what they did differently than anybody else. Like, how do we express that in a kind of unique way? And it actually ended up nudging their business model in a way. They were like, oh, wow, if we're expressing ourselves as this, we need to actually operate a little bit differently. We need to prioritize some of the things of our product a little bit differently, et cetera. And so, like, it seems this big sort of like nebulous thing, but is there a way that you can kind of think about, how people should understand just what messaging is and what it encompasses?
Well, I mean, you're hitting on a very important point, which is messaging goes beyond just marketing and communications, far beyond. Earlier, you had mentioned, social media posts, and that's, PR. That's just content that is further downstream. We're talking about messaging in the biggest brand sense, which does create tension on an organization, the operations of an organization. Like, if you're going to go to market to say these things, you better be able to back it up in all the things you do, not just in your marketing and communications, right? It actually has to be true in how everyone experiences your brand. People have to know you for that. They have to experience that. So it does, a lot of times when we go through these exercises with our clients, right, we do find that it creates some internal tension right from the top down, because it does make an organization really have to go, do we really do this? Or it does find gaps too. We want to say this, we're focusing over here, but this is really what we do. So we have experienced that with companies, sort of pivoting their actual products or operations to actually deliver on the things that they want to be able to say. They can already, they just haven't. It helps them hone in on truly kind of what their differentiation is. So yeah, I want to make it clear, when we talk about messaging, we are talking about at a sort of a much bigger perspective in an organization than this downstream, impacts on your marketing communications.
All right, so let's go to messaging playbook then, right? A messaging playbook is what?
So the messaging play, so once you define what your messaging pillars are, what is it that you want to say, then you have to figure out, okay, now how do we create the playbook that does create that umbrella across the organization? How does that trickle down into all of the aspects of your business and your communications out to your audiences? So from marketing, communications, and all the things associated with that, public relations, social media, but also sales and how your sales teams go to market and talk about the products and services, customer service, it impacts customer service. So it really goes across the organization. So the playbook is really sort of the hymnal, the songbook that you get everybody singing from, that you're hitting the same notes, right? Which is the messages themselves over and over and over again, because it's that consistency that you need and all of your communication channels in order to really have those things be conveyed in the marketplace and then people recognize them. So the playbook helps people do that by first identifying what your priority messages are, because it becomes a guidebook internally. It becomes sort of your training aid for all your staff to sort of, hit that consistent rhythm that you want people to hit. It's a great reference document for folks. And also, we would be remiss to note that this is a living, breathing document too, right? As the market changes, competition changes, your business changes, new products come online, right? You at least have a starting point to refresh it. You don't just set it and leave it, right? It's a living, breathing thing, but it at least gives you sort of that true north for everyone to follow. And it's, there's a lot of different levels that can happen within a playbook too, which I'd love to dive in, but I'm sure we're not there yet.
We're going to dive into it, but I was going to throw one other thing, and you started to touch on it when you even said a training document is, that messaging playbooks are, probably, as equally important, maybe at a different fidelity, but internal to the company as well. Right. I mean, we had a different project where we were really trying to help a pretty large organization start to that came with like, well, we have our external brand and we have our internal brand, and we were helping them develop a framework where it's like, no, you've got one brand and you've got one message, but it's going to express a little bit differently externally than it is internally. And you can even use a messaging playbook as a foundation for how you recruit people, right? If you speak a particular way and you speak a particular message, that kind of goes all the way through your job descriptions and the interview, you're going to be pulling people in that are at least going to have a head start on the culture.
That's right. I mean, absolutely. It really is like I just said before, it sets the true north for the organization, and it should show up at every communication. And one thing, I don't want to kind of jump the shark here on our conversation a little bit, but you can't do the messaging without really knowing what your positioning is for the company, right? Quite often we get in there, and a lot of companies haven't figured out what their position is in the marketplace. And then from that positioning, then how do you express that? Right. So I know I might have gone ahead a little too far, but
no, I think it's great because, we used to talk about, I think at Motive 3, we used to be, much more kind of forward about like, and we do positioning. The challenge is not a lot of people really understand what positioning is. And I don't want to dive too deep into it, but what I will say is positioning, the reason positioning is so important is because positioning happens in a landscape. It's not just about you. It's like, where do I fit on this competitive field in a way that when people need X, they know to run to me, right? They know where I am. And I think a lot of companies, even bigger companies, sometimes, the bigger they get, they become so self-consumed about what they are that they're not kind of pulling their heads up to look at like, has the field changed? Do I need to refresh my positioning? Do I need to evolve my positioning, push it forward, et cetera, et cetera? And so I agree. Messaging really starts with positioning. Every project we do, we have to figure out the positioning. Once you figure out the positioning, it makes it so much easier. I always talk about like the dominoes start to kind of fall over. Like it's that first domino that helps, helps all the other aspects of the messaging playbook come into play. But I want to talk about a very specific playbook or framework that you led and that you worked on in your past life. So you worked for Kaiser Permanente, you led a big aspect of national brand there, and things started to get so robust and so big, and there's so many moving parts to that organization that at some point you guys decided we need something to try to bring all of this together. Can you just kind of take me a little bit about, like, first of all, like what led to the need to have a playbook in a multi-billion-dollar organization?
Yeah, and it's a great example of why a messaging playbook was such a necessary exercise and such a large organization to do. When you have a large, I'll speak a little more in general and then specifically about Kaiser, but when you have an organization, be it a global entity or a domestic to the US, but spread out across the country and broken up to different regions and different leadership structures, or, and different marketing teams, right? If everything's not run under a central or, kind of a corporate marketing team, one marketing team that's managing all of the communications across all the channels, it's difficult. It's very difficult because then you have different teams deciding what's the priority that they want to say in their specific local market or region. And it may not be consistent with what is coming out of sort of the corporate brand folks. And that causes a problem, right? So it's hard to sort of pool your resources across the board if you're trying to do a national advertising campaign or any kind of sort of national effort is difficult to do when everybody has different priorities of what they're saying in their local markets. So it becomes almost impossible then. So out of that, within my role at Kaiser Permanente, where we had multiple regions and different executive leadership teams for each of those regions, different marketing teams for each of those regions, but trying to do national advertising was almost impossible or very difficult because then everybody wanted their regionally tailored advertising campaign that said something slightly different. There's no economies of scales when you do that. So, it just became necessary that we created a messaging framework that was a consistent voice across the entire organization, but then was also agreed upon across the national executive team that, yes, this is what we can get behind. This is what it should be. And then, so once we created the actual messaging framework, and then it was, okay, now how are we going to train the entire organization on how to use this? It's the first time we're doing it. So how do we actually get people to use it? How does it show up? And so creating the messaging framework itself was one exercise. Then creating the playbook or the guidelines behind how to use it was an entirely different effort, but just as important, if not more important, in terms of how to get people to use it and train them how to use it across all audiences, all channels.
Yeah, so I was consulting at Kaiser Permanente at the time that this was being developed. And so I've seen this playbook, and it's a little deceptive, right? Because the core framework is a very deceptively simple document. You can look at it on a single page, but the playbook was about this thick. So what was in there? I mean, how do you go from, this is the page, which is the framework, to this is the playbook, and it be a useful document?
Yeah, well, you're right. We called it the coffee table book because it was huge. It was very long, very thick. And then we, of course, had skinnier versions created, right? The more quick reference guides for that. But we felt that it was necessary, first of all, because it's the first time this organization's massive, right? It's, almost 200,000 employees, tens of billions of dollars, big organization. And so first time you're doing something like this is you've got to bring everybody along, right? Kaiser is known to be a very matrixed but collaborative organization. So how do you bring everyone along on this journey that may not understand, why are we doing this? Why is this important? So the first part of that playbook is really sort of bringing people on that journey. It's backing all the way up to the brand and showing how this connects or, is aligned with the brand, why we're doing it, how does it fit in our overall brand landscape. And then there's, kind of diving into the framework itself and the structure. Yes, it can fit on one page, but there's a whole lot of information that's embedded on that one page. When you look at the messaging itself, it's first defining what are the attributes of the organization. So it's sort of what you do, and then there's the benefits. Right. And then what are the benefits based on what you do? What are the benefits that you're delivering to your audience? So those are kind of the X and Y axes of this framework. And then in the context of that, we came up with these things called core concepts, right? So it's where the attributes and the benefits meet is a core concept or an idea that you want to express. So we as an organization have this attribute that delivers these benefits. And then what's the combination of those two coming together that delivers on a core concept or an idea that gets expressed, that we want it to get expressed? So it's kind of this elaborate matrix, but we had to help people wayfind how to use these core concepts. And underneath each core concepts are proof points, right? Because then that's when people go, well, what about this? Or what about that? And you're like, those are actually proof points. Those are proof points. Those are proof points. So each core concept could have a whole bunch of proof points, right? So it was teaching people how to use that messaging framework or matrix. So because it was something we came up with in the best organization of having on one page, but there was a whole lot of information packed in on that one page. And then from showing them how to use the matrix, then we actually put examples in. Now we want to apply this to actual communications. So we took member communications. So it was either member communications or B2B communications. And we showed how you actually plugged in this matrix into actual communication. How do these core concepts and proof points show up in an actual communication or document?
Now, I'm going to tease out something that you said, because I think it might just slip by folks listening. So one of the most important things was having examples, right? How do you take this core concept, like having a core concept, down to having, it show up in a piece of B2B, business to business documentation where you're talking to, Kaiser Permanente is a major health care and insurance company kind of mashed up together. So one of its customer groups or client groups is other businesses, right? So it's going to show up there, but then you're also talking about how it shows up in member communications, right? So when you're talking to the members or the insured or patients, right? Those core concepts need to be in there in a similar way. So I'm trying to help people wrap their mind around this. Like, if you've got a messaging playbook, it's going to help you not only say, hey, Amazon, here's why we're a good insurance carrier for your employee population, but also, hey, John Doe, here's some new benefits that we've added to your package, or here's what you need to know about the next time you check in, for an appointment or whatever it is. Like, we're really talking about a thread that kind of goes through all of these things. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. That's right.
So you've got the core concepts, and part of what made it the Bible, is that you had to think through, who are we communicating to, through what channels, about what, like what kind of content buckets, and how are we going to take this kind of the key ideas or the essence of what a brand or a company or a service represents, and make sure that it really shows up no matter what. Kind of the same way we wear different clothes at different times, but it's still us wearing all of those clothes. That's kind of like how I think about the kind of most elemental aspect of messaging, and your messaging playbook is how to make sure that shows up no matter where you are.
That's right. That's exactly it.
So we have done these in very big companies, right? Kaiser Permanente, this was a massive exercise. I'm curious about, tell me a little bit about that process. You've got people in all sorts of regions, in all sorts of functions. You've got sales side messaging, you've got member side messaging, you've got prospect side messaging. So how did you go and really collect the kind of background information to know that when it finally landed into the playbook, you had something that was feasible?
Well, it took, a better part of 2 years just to arrive at that one page in terms of what goes on that page. And countless conversations across many different organization and organizational leaders, the work was sponsored all the way through the national executive team. So with the CEO at the time of Kaiser Permanente, Bernard Tyson, and his entire executive leadership team were involved in this process. That's how important this work was to the organization. So it took a long time. Like I mentioned before, it's a highly matrix, very collaborative organization. So it was really important that if this were going to succeed, that we needed to involve a lot of people. And it wasn't, and this is not something that, at an organization that massive, it wasn't something we wanted to rush through either. We wanted to get it right so we could get people on board and it made sense. And, the first thing we did was sort of, we started with, and Kaiser Permanente, for those that know the organization, know it has a very strong brand reputation in terms of its branding in the marketplace. And so you kind of start there. I mean, we already had some very clear messaging that we'd been pushing with the Thrive campaign for many, many years. And there's already been some really strong messaging in the marketplace, but how do we take that and get it to a place that works across the entity? So it was a lot of collaboration, a lot of being adaptable, right? Because, it's kind of in those big organizations, it just takes one person, to upset the apple cart a bit, but it's, personally, I think the matrix that we did for Kaiser was a little complex because we were trying to appease a lot of different parts of the organization. But it needed to be, I think it needed to start there. And I think that's what was important, was to more important to bring people along in the process than it was to kind of, resist and wanting to cut back too much out of the gate. So, I mean, we got it done.
Well,
it's still being used to this day, from what I understand. I haven't been there in 5 years, but
yeah, I mean, I actually wanted to kind of say that, to anyone watching this or listening, it's like the most important thing is to do round one, right? First of all, you learn a lot about what you're trying to say, who you're trying to say it to, where you're trying to say it, just in the exercise. And it is something that should be living and breathing. At the same time, it's such a different process for an enterprise level company where you really do need to do your diligence, talking to all the right people. The worst case scenario is you come up with a messaging playbook and, it sits on a desk and collects dust and nothing really happens to it. And that's part of the reason of the going around and doing the interviews and having the conversations and socializing. It's a cultural exercise in itself. Now, I kind of wanted to go to the flip side. We've also worked with startups. We've also worked with some small to medium sized, businesses where what is needed is not nearly so robust. There's a huge difference, between trying to build a playbook that 20,000 people or more. How many did you say were at Kaiser? Like
200,000.
200,000 people, are going to have to reference to, versus a startup that might have 12 people, right? The worst thing you could do is develop a Bible for a company with 12 people. And so we take a very different approach with those guys. And in some ways, what I've noticed is so exciting about kind of working with smaller companies doing a messaging playbook is, first of all, them even having the awareness that something like this is going to be useful to have, at a foundational level, but then what I've seen is kind of coming up with their core stories is so helpful as they start to scale, because the CEO and the product leaders have narratives that they can talk about that are kind of in their back pocket. The marketing person, has like the key pillars that they need to use. And even as they're outsourcing, whether they're outsourcing their digital marketing or their ads or their PR, whatever they have to be, they've actually got something that can start to hold that together, and it can happen a lot more quickly. So we do those with like workshops and, kind of interviewing the teams to make sure that we've got everything right. But it's an interesting, I think it's kind of interesting how I think of them as sort of like an accordion. I was talking to somebody the other day, like, you know, the skinny version, the kind of bare minimum version is, what's your key narrative? What are your core concepts or your messaging pillars, right? At least what are your messaging pillars? You may have core concepts under that, but what are your messaging pillars? And then these narratives. How do you take those and actually turn them into like a handful of little elevator speeches that you got to use all the time? And as soon as you can do that as a small company, you're going to get everybody on the same page versus trying to kind of reel in messaging from a very large company. And you're really kind of trying to put the genie back in the bottle when you're working with a big company.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, on the skinny version, we'll call it the skinny version versus the larger, more complex matrix where you have core concepts. But I think the skinny version, if we're going to stick with calling it that, for a lot of our, smaller startups, even mid-sized companies, the skinny version is appropriate. Because I think the most important part there is getting to what your core messaging pillars are. And what's included in that is being clear as to what your attributes are that you are delivering to the market and what are the benefits, right? That comes out of that skinny version. And the culmination of your attributes and the benefits are your messaging pillars. So it's really important, because just that exercise alone gives you your priority messages that you go to market with, right? It shows up and sort of those, profiles you're talking about, or those, vision statements and so forth. Just that exercise alone is so critical for a business of any size.
Yeah. I was just kind of thinking about, how does a company know whether they're kind of, at the startup end of the spectrum or whether they're at the enterprise end of the spectrum? I think you actually covered it with the enterprise, but like, how do you know you need a messaging playbook? I mean, actually, I'm gonna maybe partially answer that question before you go forward. One of the things that we've been doing a lot lately, and that has got my mind buzzing a lot, is how much AI is affecting how companies talk about themselves internally and externally. I mean, it's real easy to throw a prompt into a large language model and have it kind of spit you out an answer, but it's doing that without context, right? And you might be giving it some as you go along, but one of the things I'm so bullish about and so excited about is that, like, I mean, I think if companies haven't had a messaging playbook in the past, it's like ASAP. You've got to get one of these, even if it is a very scaled down version, because there's that opportunity now for like a messaging playbook to be truly alive. If you kind of program your whether it's ChatGPT or Claude or Bard or whatever you're using, it almost doesn't matter. But if you've got those elements and kind of plug that into your AI, you now have the ability to, expand on the content or job description or whatever it is that you're building, but make sure that it's understanding who you are as a company, how you talk, what you talk about, that it's aligning to your pillars. And so I answered the question, but like, at what point do you think that like you need a playbook? Does every company need a playbook?
In my opinion, yes. I don't know how if you're expressing anything outward to any audience, whether it's sales or, direct to consumers or whatever, you need a playbook. You need to know what you're saying. You need to be consistent about what you're saying. So yeah, I think everyone does. And I was waiting for you to bring up AI in all of this. Because the thing is, you can't cheat this exercise with using AI. Sure, AI will spit out something if you write a prompt asking it for messaging and you put some high-level basic inputs into a prompt. Sure, it will give you a response. AI is trained to always give you a response. The challenge is, like you said, AI doesn't have all the context. What's interesting is that, you and I have been playing around a lot with this, right? We have a model that we use for messaging. AI is only going to give you so much, garbage in, garbage out. Learning how to write prompts is is such a critical skill. But again, it's only going to give you so much. And I think a lot of what we come up with in these playbooks is through conversations with executives and team members, right? It's us listening for those key nuggets that they don't even know are the nuggets that should be elevated in their messaging. They don't even know it. It comes out of these conversations and us probing and asking, and we're listening, and we're trained to listen for certain things. And because we have an outside in perspective, right, we're listening to it with fresh ears, fresh perspective than those that are all day, every day, can't see the trees of the forest. They don't even know. So if you try to internally use AI to come up with your messaging, you're probably going to miss it because you don't necessarily even know that what the nuggets are because you're so close to it, right? So I think that a lot of the magic of what we come up with is through our experience being outside in, and the prompting and probing that we're doing in live conversations is quite often where the magic comes from, and realizing something that they don't even realize about themselves. So yes, everybody needs a messaging playbook. You can't just use AI, rely upon AI. It will give you something, but is it the right thing? Right. So there's still a human element to doing this work. And it's really, digging at it. You gotta do some work there to get to it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think one of the things that's so important, and it's funny, it's something I've always noticed in the work that we do, is like when you ask someone like, what is your brand promise, or what is your position, like so often you get these like kind of platitudes, and big words that are empty words that that don't actually hit at a human level, right? And so I also want to let people know, like, not to overly intellectualize this process. One of the reasons we love doing customer interviews and we love talking to customers is customers just give you the answer. I mean, we had one where like, it was like, well, they always pick up the phone. Like that was like a key attribute. Like, I mean, that says a lot. It's like, they always pick up the phone, and are there for me when I need them. And if you talk to the company, they were coming up with all of these like very, I mean, things they've worked very, very hard on, right? Like in terms of the product itself. But part of the value to the customer is that, yeah, but you're there, the people are there to support the product behind it. And so it's, if you're working on your playbook, and we've got a few articles on our website, if you want to go and just learn a little bit more about a playbook, or follow us on LinkedIn, or me on LinkedIn, but like, don't also make this rocket science. Like that's almost like the worst you could possibly do, is try to make these like big, don't use SAT words, don't be obtuse, and don't say stuff that everybody is already saying. I mean, that's and that, which takes us all the way back to positioning. What else have we not talked about, or people need to know about this messaging and messaging playbook combo, even though there's like a jillion things?
There's a jillion things. I think through our many years of doing this with lots of different clients, I think everyone's always excited when they get their messaging playbook from us and the work, because it's there, it's tangible, it's like, wow. And right, we've elevated something through all the conversations and the mind meld to come up with this. But I can't overemphasize the importance of implementation, training, education, and that's an ongoing effort. This is not a one and done. We have our playbook and it, sits on a shelf, and, we did have a client that immediately internalized it, right? Changed the copy on their website to align to it, PR strategy aligned to it, right? Their sales materials aligned to it. Like they immediately implemented across all of their various departments and teams and communications. And that's what you're supposed to do. Right. It also, it went across everyone. It didn't just stay in the marketing and communications realm. And this was the same client that also realized that, you know, maybe they're not focusing operationally or product wise in the right areas. So, you know, that is so critical. Yes, you've got to do the work to come up with your messaging, but once you have it, you got to do the work to educate, implement, and train and keep going.
Yeah, and I guess I'd add to that, you know, depending on the maturity of the company, you know, if we've also worked with some like very bleeding edge companies who are kind of putting things into the market or that are like very new. And with those, it's like, yes, come up with a playbook, because it's more important than ever when you're small and you're trying to get like product market fit and make sure people know what you are, that you're actually speaking narrowly enough to know whether it's resonating. But with those, it's like, come up with it, but then it has to be stress tested in real life. Like, is this working? What's hitting? Kind of what's resonating? Do we need to change some things? You know, sometimes it's a little bit of a, you know, 2 millimeter shift that kind of changes everything. So I'm gonna shift focus now a little bit, just to something more fun, maybe. I don't know. But what's a good thing you're reading or listening to, you know, business or not related, that's kind of got you lit up lately?
Well, I wish I knew you were going to ask this question. Well, one of my favorite podcasts is The Next Big Idea. I love that podcast and always can't wait until they have a new episode. Just because I find it highly stimulating, whatever they talk about. So I would highly recommend The Next Big Idea podcast. By way of books, there's too many. There's always too many. I do love Draw to Win. Is that our favorite book? That little book?
Yeah, I'm trying to see if I have a copy. Oh, I do.
Yeah, that book I think is just genius for how to express, right, some of those key ideas or messages you're trying to express by way of visuals. I think everybody should read that, but that's an easy read and it's an easy thing to implement too.
Yeah, 100%. So I'll throw in a podcast that I'm crushing on lately too, which is The Knowledge Project. It's just a very it's really about kind of what are the proven mental models over time. Like I almost would call it like the How to Think podcast. I mean, it's got just like really great, like, how do we think about this? How do we think about that? What are some models that we can use and frameworks we can use for thinking, just kind of problem solve? And so I'm loving that. And I'm trying to think like books. Well, I'm gonna do an oldie but goodie as well. I got to see if I have it here behind me. I know it's here somewhere. I might have it some other place, but it's positioning. You know, Al Reese and Jack Trout a million years ago wrote the book Positioning. It's a short, easy read. For me, when I started my career, like, I don't even know how I found out about it, but like, it was foundational to me in terms of understanding how you differentiate yourself from everybody else on the competitive landscape. This was like pre, you know, blue ocean strategy and all of that stuff, which all of that stuff is really just riffing on positioning. And I guess the other one I would throw out there, now we're going into the creative world, is I'm really loving The Creative Act by Rick Rubin. And then if you want to go old school, Ogilvy on Advertising.
I was waiting to say Ogilvy.
So good.
I think Ogilvy on advertising is everybody that does marketing or anyone just interested in how brands come to life, right? And in the public realm, you have to read Ogilvy on advertising. I mean, it's just genius. The
copywriting. I mean, the copywriting was it was real. I mean, back when copy kind of ruled, you know, it's just so good at copywriting.
Okay, so I think our next talk, Ginger,
yes,
should be about how brand personality, tone of voice shows up in your messaging.
I think that's great because it's part of the playbook, but we didn't even go there.
Right.
And it is part of what you need to also like kind of feed ChatGPT or whatever you're using, or else it's going to give you the in a world, which is my big pet peeve. So anyone who's listening or watching, if your sentences start out with, in this complex digital landscape, in a world where this happens, it's such a tip off. The
AI bots
wrote that. Yeah. Can't stand that stuff. So, well, thank you. This has been an amazing conversation. Do you have anything else to add before we wrap it up?
No, I do not. I think we gave a lot for people to think about and a lot of resources to look up.
Yay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.